Welcome to Lift Your Story podcast with guest Dmitria Burby, author and healer. Hi everyone, I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Mississauga, Ontario, and I'm with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
Today we welcome Dmitria Burby, and she is an author and healer. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I am very excited about our conversation today.
Well, it says that you help people reconnect with their spirit. So I'm sure there's this personal story there.
Yes, there is for sure. I have gone through a beautiful personal transformation from, really being caught up in, I think, all of the normal things in life, in, going to school and having a career and having a family and a beautiful partner in that. And one day realized that I was really unhappy, that I was actually fairly depressed, and I was suffering from really bad anxiety. And all of a sudden one day it dawned on me that in order to solve that problem that I was having, I needed to work on me. And I didn't really know what was missing. And so I set out on a journey that I didn't know that I was setting out on, and ultimately rediscovered who I am and reconnected to what I would call my spirit or my soul. And it was such a life-changing transformation for me that it has inspired me to help others do the same thing.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working in corporate America. I was fairly successful in my career, and I knew I had this epiphany that I could continue as I had done with this sort of career success, but that there would be a cost to it. And that cost was the relationship with my children and my husband. And that I really needed to make a choice, that I couldn't have both, that I really, if I wanted to have that loving connection with my children and husband, that I needed to put more time and energy towards it. And that sort of kicked off this contemplation around what was really important to me in life. And ultimately, I ended up leaving my corporate job and dove into being what I would call the perfect mom. And at that point, this idea of what a perfect mom was different than how I see it now. But I thought, I'm going to make lunches, and I'm going to show up at school, and I'm going to volunteer. And the funny thing is that my kids were in high school. Like, my oldest kids were in high school. So, showing up on your kids' high school campus is, not acceptable to them. So I was a little bit behind the times on all of that. And it quickly made me realize that I actually needed to figure out how to be happy with myself rather than flipping into another title, another role that I could play. And so it was a really beautiful moment for me to go inwards and say, okay, how do I actually sit with myself and figure out who I am and what makes me happy?
I say something really interesting. I love the show Mom. And I know some people, I don't know if you know it, but it was really cute because last night I was watching that, and she was talking about, it's a long story away from it, but then she goes to the grocery store and her daughter is sick and she's buying this, and she's talking to another mother. And she asks the other mother, how old is your daughter or your son? And she says, he's 7. And she goes, how old is your daughter? She says, 41. And she's emerging from this whole having had a lack of having to do that. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with going there. But then all of a sudden, when she got into the new role of being a mother, she says, why didn't anybody tell me how difficult it was to care for somebody? But on the other hand, what you're saying, though, is what somebody said is because you're not taking care of yourself, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a balance, and it's also, I think, learning to realize that taking care of yourself and really understanding yourself allows you to give in a way and care in a way that is much more profound than just doing the acts. I mean, this process has completely transformed me as a mother and as a wife to my husband, right? Because all of the sudden now my focus is less on making lunches and volunteering for them and like doing the things that you're supposed to do as a mom, and really focused on how do I ensure that I feel a really deep connection with them? How do I feel connected to my friends and family, and how does that ripple out into the community and impact the world that I'm creating?
I think most women tend to always put everybody else first. The husband, the kids, maybe even their career, and them the last thing. And I think you're fortunate that you were able to realize that, back up and say, wait a minute, I got to change something, for everybody, but particularly for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it always. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel so, so fortunate that I had that realization and that my husband supported me in taking that leap to really dive into exploring everything that I did. But yeah, I mean, it is sort of this critical issue that we have, and I think it plagues men as well, right? Like, I think it's one of the unseen, untalked about issues with men is that yes, they do take care of themselves maybe slightly better than women, but at the end of the day, there's sort of those external pressures on the men in our society to provide, to do the things that are sort of pushed onto the masculine part of our society as well. And we aren't taught at any age really to stop and really take care of ourselves and help people understand the power that comes from actually being a really healthy person, both physically, emotionally, and mentally, right? And when you're a healthy person, then you can actually give to others in such a powerful and loving way that doesn't exist in our education system today.
Yeah. And what's nice, especially if you're married, is when you can come together, like you say, you wanted to do this, your husband says, yeah, great, I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it. A lot of marriages aren't that way.
Yes,
unfortunately.
I am very, very aware of how supportive my husband is in my endeavors and feel very lucky about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so can I ask a question? Because I know that you said that you feel like there's this hole inside of you, there's something missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's a lot of people, like you said, males and females, and they will go to something else to try and fill that void, whether, and to be honest, whether it's food, alcohol, drugs, or whatever, because there's that void. And obviously you took a journey where you didn't go that path, you went and found it, but there are people who do that. That hole is real. And could you explain a little bit more how you became very aware of it? I know that you said you weren't happy, but when you say whole, that's how people see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on that we as people tend to look at external ways to fill that hole, right? Like you can see it all around us with the consumerism that is America. We are trying to fill that hole with material things, and that, perpetuates the issue. But ultimately, for me, I feel like that hole was a disconnect from who I truly am, really understanding where that life force is inside of you, where you can say, okay, I don't need to look at an external thing to make me whole. I can actually see myself. I understand who I am. I understand all the parts of me, the parts that I'm really proud of, the parts that, are challenging about myself. And I can see all of that. And that's who I am. That's the whole me. And that inner wholeness, if you will, that understanding of who you are as a person then can generate the accolades and the confidence and the self-love that you need, rather than looking to external sources, whether that's at your job needing praise from your boss in order to feel like you are worthy, or if it is drugs or alcohol, or if it's shopping, like all of those things. are the things that you tend to hold on to. Or at least for me, I was definitely a workaholic. I'm a type A perfectionist. I still have those tendencies. Those don't go away, but I no longer do it for the praise, right? I'm not doing it so somebody else will see it and say, oh, you're good enough because you've accomplished this thing. I'm able to say, oh, I want to create something and it makes me feel good to do it in this way. And that's a huge shift from that external need to like really finding yourself internally.
Perfectly said.
So, what led you to write your book?
Um, I would say divine intervention, and I'm like chuckling inside about it because it's so ironic. But I started a blog, maybe a year and a half, 2 years before I wrote the book, and the blog was really meant to be like a public diary of my journey and thoughts of what was happening, and kind of just for fun. And it did its job. And then one day I was writing a blog post and it went a little bit long, and I thought, oh, maybe this is 2 blog posts. And I kept writing, and then all of a sudden I thought, this is a book. This is much more than can be consumed in multiple blog posts. And so I wrote the whole thing. It was sort of like pouring out of me. And then I ended up with a manuscript, and I thought, what am I going to do with this thing? Like, how do you turn all of these words into a book? And, me naively was like, I think you just send it somewhere and have it printed. And I have a good friend that writes children's books. And so I reached out to her and I said, what do you do with all these words on paper? And she lovingly connected me with an editor. And so I sent it off, and the editor was like, this is definitely a book. And there's a whole process that you go through to publish a book that is not just pressing print. So I went on that journey. Like everything else, all of the things lined up for me, right? I had the friend knew the editor knew all the right people to connect me with that worked for my project. So again, really blessed in that way.
Had you ever thought about writing a book before?
No. Well, that's not true. I had thought about it, but my background is in engineering, computer engineering. So I'm very math based, very logic driven, and was a pretty poor writer all through school. So, my weakness is actually writing, or at least it had been my whole life. And the idea that I might write a book sounded kind of interesting to me, but the idea of getting over that, what I would call a deficiency, didn't seem possible until I had done it. And even today, you heard me, I slip and I'm like, I'm not a good writer, but the reality is that that's sort of like an old belief that I'm still working through.
Can I say something really quickly? I really have to interject on this one because it's pretty funny. I am an art history major, honors journalism, all of that, but I love math, and I ended up doing bookkeeping for years. So, but yet my ex-husband, who was an engineer, he said, oh, artsy fartsy, and there was that type of thing. And yet when he saw me writing, he started writing, and he was really good at it. I was almost like, envious of some of the things, but then you have to understand everybody's got, I was younger, in my 20s, and you get envious very quickly and you're going, oh my gosh, you're writing better than me. But it's really not, because you all have your own styles. But there is that mindset in the engineering department that say, well, I'm mathematical, and it's not at all. And it's beautiful because you're working the other side of your brain, just like me, who grew up with a lot of arts and history. And I was always good in math, but I didn't want to do it. Ended up in a very mathematical side of things for many years. Yeah. I just wanted to say to the listeners, like, don't think that way. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to highlight that those are limiting beliefs, right? That we create within ourselves. They're not actually true statements. And so much of the way that we grow up and what we learn create these rules or beliefs about ourselves that then are really based on nothing, or maybe they're based on a very limited experience, right? Like for me, it was in grade school, I struggled writing my first paper. Well,
fast forward, I now realize I'm dyslexic. So of course at a young age, it was very challenging for me to do those English assignments in grade school. But that's what caused this belief that I couldn't write. So I never even pursued it because, if you believe you can't do it, you're not going to try. And so I agree with you. It's like, try those things that you're interested in, try the things that you want to do, because as an adult, you might be in a very different situation than you were when that belief was created.
Yeah, because you think you're a logical person, because you think logic, math, but well, I'm not creative, right?
Yeah.
But until you try to create, you don't know.
Yeah. And the reality is we are all creative. I mean, I definitely think of myself as very logic based. And then I take a step back and I'm like, oh, everything about me is creative. As humans, we're innately creative. We are creators. We create everything around us. Even if that creative mechanism might be math or logic, it's still creative.
Yeah.
Well, this is like my daughter. She just took an idea and she went in she was a psychologist at university, went back to college to become an engineer. And she says the logic behind that was because in her creative world, she created an idea, but she needed the engineering to be able to finish the prototype. So
That's amazing.
so that's the balance between sometimes, it could be the other way around too, right? I think
Yeah. That reminds me, I just watched the first part of, I think it's called Baking Impossible on Netflix. And it has a baker and an engineer, and they are paired together to create like wearable or functional baked goods. So, and it's just a beautiful example of two different disciplines coming together and meshing, and you see the transformation of the baker and you see the transformation of the engineer, and it's a really beautiful show.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that because my wife is very analytical, very logical. She loves to bake. That's her thing. She likes to do. Anytime she always wants to volunteer to bring something you have to bake. But like she says, I've got to have a recipe. Like I had an aunt that she just a pinch of this a little bit. No, I've got to have how much, 1 teaspoon. I need to know all that. So that's her. She likes to be creative baking, but she needs the roadmap, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's what you're talking about there. So tell us about Luminance Healing.
Yes. So Luminance Healing started again as that blog. That was my personal public diary to share with the world. And, during my journey, I realized that really I have a passion for helping other people rediscover themselves and really find those parts of themselves that are missing, and that they're not aware of. And so that's what I offer. I work with clients one-on-one to really help them see the parts of themselves that they are missing or that they're overlooking in some way. And then I think the critical part of how I help people is helping them integrate that into their life. So I think, Lorianne, as you said in the beginning, when you find those parts of you, you could blow up your life, right? Like so often you hear stories of like, oh, I rediscovered this part of me and this is who I am. And, I got a divorce and my kids are out of the house and like, here's my new life, right? And my goal is, that's really beautiful for some people and needed, but there are a lot of beautiful things in the life that you've spent creating up until that point. And so if you can take as much of that you've created already and add more into it to fulfill your life even more, but keep all of those beautiful things, that's my goal, is to really help you create space in your current life so that you can add more of you into it.
Okay, so I just have to apologize for the dogs barking, but talking about creating a better life, I am living with my parents right now, and I have an apartment and they're upstairs, and it's the most beautiful part of my life right now. And at one time I was so afraid to love them too much because I was afraid to lose them. And now I am in a position where I want to love them as much as I possibly can. And this is the best opportunity ever in changing that. But that was probably one of the holes that I had for the longest time was that fear
Yeah.
of opening up.
Yeah, it's so true. The things that we fear keep us so locked up in our own prison, right? And like ultimately those fears, I think oftentimes create the fear that you are worried about experiencing, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden when you let go, like I love that you're living with them, that you get to have so much extra time with them, right? And like have more experiences before ultimately you do lose them, right? Because we're all gonna experience that. So it's like how do we make the best of the time that we have and really focus on the things that we want so that, inevitably when things shift as they will, you have all of that extra like juicy goodness in your life to take forward with you. I mean,
And never underestimate the fact that I might go before them,
yes,
right?
yes, right. I
Yeah,
know.
look
No,
at that too.
never know.
Right.
Yeah,
No.
So build you're like, not because you're going to be, I'm not with my parents. I'm actually being a little bit selfish right now and I'm loving it. It's for me.
yeah.
It's to fill that part of me that was negating all of this love because I was afraid of it. And so what you do is beautiful because you're sharing with people how to get there, how to find yourself, how to find what you need, what you love, what you can do. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have clients come to you say they've had career success, you know, their kids have grown, they're off, gone their own, and they're kind of like, who am I? What do I do now? That type person.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is that so often people actually, when they start to talk, actually do know a lot more about themselves than they are aware of. It's this really interesting thing that happens where we know it, but we don't acknowledge it. And so having somebody else that can be the mirror for you, right? Like we hear about this in mythology. It's very common, but being a mirror to reflect back to them through another human voice that says, hey, do you realize that there's this part of you and this part of you that I see? And then you can really start to say, okay, as a client, like, oh wow, they're presenting all of this in front of me. What feels right? What do I want to lean into, and what is being reflected, and what parts do I not like, and then why don't I like seeing those parts of me? Is there something that scares me? Is there something that makes me feel uncomfortable? Is that a shadow of me that I should explore a little bit? And so it's really about seeing it all and then slowly again integrating those pieces in a way that ultimately makes you feel whole at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I have a question. When a client comes to you, the very first thing, I love this. So what would be your first question to your client? Like, how do you move into this? Because this is a pretty big subject for a lot of people who also don't want to share it.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that happen. Usually I just start with what's going on in your life today. What is going well? Where are you having challenges? What's making you uncomfortable? What are all those facets that you can share with me? And then I also am a channel, which this gets a little bit like woo woo for people, but that's okay. Um, so I tap into your energy body, your spirit, and essentially pick up on information that is coming through. So it's a combination of the client talking and sharing, and then me picking up on some of those sort of like energetic pieces of information that I can help bring to the table and round out the story. And then usually after that first session, we really have some pretty big nuggets of information to explore. And then we can start to break that down and say, what are you comfortable with? What is uncomfortable? And go from there. That first session is a little bit longer and we spend some time really digging in. And most often, the things that come out, people are like, I've known that my whole life. Like, I was, 5 and I wanted to do this, or like, yes, I have all this stuff around my house and I don't know why I keep buying it, like, of course that makes so much sense, right? Like you have these moments, these epiphanies of like where you've been unconsciously actually like building this part of you and you don't even know it, and then everything clicks and you're like, yes, it all makes sense. Thank you. So it's pretty fun.
I
Yeah.
love what you just said. Consciously knowing, building all of this inside of you. I think that is something that you should tagline on everything you write.
Thank you. I will steal that from you.
No, you said it. I'm just telling you to do that because it's yours. It's your words, and I think that that's one of those things I thought of, because I even mapped out my life today or 2 days ago, and from the forks in the road, right? So you might have 3 forks in the road, and which one am I going to pick? And many times in my life, I picked another one, and I did the different forks that I might have gone to just for fun.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the forks that I took.
Oh yeah. I think of them as opportunities, right? Like we all have the opportunity to end up where, if you will, like we're supposed to, or where you're meant to be. But if you choose to take a different path, like those detours are essential, right? I could not be who I am today without having spent 15 years in corporate America doing what I was doing. I would not have the ability, like the actual capabilities that I have today. I wouldn't have those life experiences to help me understand and empathize with other people. I couldn't be who I am if I did this at 20, right? Like I need that life experience and all of those detours, all of the challenges and hardships to get me to this place. And I think that's one of the beautiful things when you really dig in and do the work. It's like sounds like you are deep into, is that you can have this great appreciation and gratitude for every part of your life up until this point. And then it shifts how you see your future, right? Because now every time you encounter a challenge, instead of it being like, why is this happening to me? You can really lean into, oh my gosh, something amazing is going to come from this challenge. I have no idea what it is. And it might suck right now that I'm in it, but I know that every other challenge in my life has led me to this moment, and it's pretty amazing. So this must be another one.
Beautiful.
So how can our listeners reach out to you?
You can find my website at luminancehealing.com. That's probably the best way. I'm also on Instagram, and my handle's at Luminance Healing.
Okay. And the name of your book and where they can get it.
It is available on Amazon, and it is called Return to the Light Within.
Okay, great.
Love it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story today, for sharing everything that you're talking about. I love the left and the right brain is what I call it, coming together. And I'm kind of laughing because you're talking about, intuition and bringing the channel stuff. And of course, Roy, Mr., he believes in it, but he's got like, that's why we work so well together, because he totally he's totally
I do it, and it's a little hard for me to wrap my head around and believe. So I get it. I completely get it. Thank you guys for having me. It has been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being our guest. We appreciate that.
Thank you.